It's Don here from the board. Thanks for coming along and checking out this video. So this is a follow-up to the mini pottery wheel turning, sculpting, throwing, whatever it was that I did before. So I just want to walk through what I did with those two pieces and what I attempted to do at home to bisque fire the ceramic I made using that little mini pottery wheel. Now, of course, you can check out on the link thing for the previous video on what that wheel looks like and when I actually attempt to use it. So I'll switch over to my pictures to start off with, and then we'll talk through and actually have a look at the final thing. So one of the challenges here was that for me to do what I wanted to do was I wanted to be able to fire and glaze my own pottery at home for the purposes of attempting to make an encoder wheel. Now, you would have seen previous attempts from other videos that I've also gone down this pathway trying to do that using a mini lathe. And I'm just exploring what kind of stuff that you can do with these little mini tools at home in a limited setup environment. So I live in a unit apartment block. I have a barbecue on my balcony, and that is what I'm going to attempt to do. So being an experimental person, being a scientist and trained that way, science and engineering, I wanted to see what things were going to look like before and after. And so I actually took some measurements for the clay bodies, the greenware, because they weren't fired before they went into the barbecue. So this is the attempted encoder knob, which was 17.6 grams, and then this tiny little plate was at 5.7 grams on my grain scales. And that is the setup that I've got that I was trying to use. It's just my charcoal barbecue. I've got some baskets that I normally use, had some charcoal there, and just was going to set it on fire, let it heat up, and hopefully it would reach the right temperatures. Now, from my own research, what I discovered was that using charcoal with air assist, you can reach 1,000 degrees. You can reach 1,100 degrees under the right conditions, which is actually enough to bisque fire and turn the clay into ceramic. It's very rudimentary to do that, but it is actually a valid technique and it can work. So in order to help that along, this was my air assist. So I went and got a cheap $10 travel hairdryer from the shops, and I also reduced the nozzle down just by using some toilet paper rolls and taped it up because it's got like a duck bill on it for the purposes of drying your hair, but I didn't want that wide spread of airflow. So I taped it down to have a very, narrow and directable airflow to where I wanted it to go. So in the pieces went, started up the charcoal, started firing it, and you can actually see that piece there is the plate, the little disc, and just a little bit of a zoom up on that. It's blackening from the carbon and char that's burning. And then as it's starting to heat up, it starts to get lighter, which is really interesting. So here's the hairdryer starting to go, and you can see it's blowing a lot of embers around. So starting to really build up that temperature, and you can see it's glowing. It's starting to glow to the actual temperature of the charcoal. And unfortunately, the encoder at this point in time cracked. It broke. It exploded. That is the top piece. A wedge of it splintered off the main body of the round that I had made. A little bit disappointing, but I wasn't too surprised because I haven't had a lot of experience in working with this kind of stuff. It could have been either moisture that still hadn't made its way out, the heating rate would have been possibly too fast, too quick. There could have been entrained air in there because I didn't wedge it. Like, how do you wedge a small blob of clay to actually press and get out, large air? It's very difficult. But that's, just part of the experimentation, right? Rather than me going and traveling and finding a kiln firing service and everything else and having the same result, I'm just having a bit of fun with my barbecue on my balcony, getting the air assist up, and now the actual ceramic bodies are meeting the same temperature as the charcoal under full pelt. And it worked. It really worked. So if you saw from the previous video on the pottery toning, you would have seen that the ceramic was, a bit of this dullish gray color when it was wet, and it kind of had this whiteness to it. Like if we go all the way back to the first video, first pictures, they were kind of white, but if I put this in water, it would actually still dissolve. And so getting all the way down to the end and getting it through the process, there's some, marring from the actual firing process, but these actually turned into ceramic bodies. They got hot enough. And then, of course, I weighed them afterwards to see what the shrinkage was going to be like. Because when you go from wet to greenware and then greenware to bisque, is there a significant amount of change? And that obviously means your tolerances and everything else is going to be really important if you're trying to make stuff that's going to have fitment, right? So that's the encoder round, and it lost about 10% of weight. And the little flat disc, the plate, what I was calling the plate, lost about 12%. But diameter-wise, it actually didn't change from when it was the dried greenware to the bisque firing. So that was actually quite nice to see, but I guess it was probably because it was quite small. Whereas if you have a much larger piece, I would expect that the water loss and the shrinkage would be more measurable. When you're talking about, 20 mils, like a 10% is 2 mil, which would be huge, right? So, whereas a 1% change, 0.2 of a mil, might not be easily detectable on the plastic calipers that I was using. So, what does that mean? What does that mean? If we go down now to the desktop, here is two pieces of that. So that is the plate portion, and it's been washed and cleaned up, so it's actually quite nice and white and bright with this CO2 stuff, SiO2. And this is the chip that actually broke off. So that's the bit that exploded from the firing process, and you can actually see there's a bit of carbonization from that firing process. And these definitely do not dissolve in water, which is great. So it actually has turned into pottery. Now, in terms of how do I know that they're actually pottery as well, is the feel, the texture, and the sound. Greenware doesn't sound like that. So I'm really, really, really super duper happy that it worked. And my research has paid off in that charcoal with air assist will hit 1100 degrees. So where I'm going to go from here is I'm going to make some more pieces. And the reason why you're not seeing the other half of the encoder is because I'm actually going to glaze it, and it's actually off outside, covered in ash glaze, which is another primitive technique. So I'm going to be trying to use ash glaze on it to see what I can actually get out of that as a process of glazing and firing at home, because low fire glazing can work at under 1000 degrees. So that's sort of the next step on where we're going to go with this. So yeah, if you were thinking about playing with pottery at home, whether it's hand building or if it's throwing on a wheel, a proper wheel, a little mini wheel or whatever, but you don't have firing services nearby, or you don't want to rock up to a studio and be like, hey, I just want to fire these little things that I've done, but you've got a charcoal barbecue and a hairdryer, well, with the right precautions and safety, you could actually fire your pieces at home. So anyway, I'm going to wrap it there, just as a starting piece on that, and there'll be a couple more videos following on just to talk over the experience and the outcomes of all of that. And yeah, hopefully you enjoy this journey of me trying to make some ceramic pieces which goodness knows where they're going to lead and come back to on the keyboard front. Alright, well, if you like this kind of stuff, hit that like button, and of course subscribe and bell notifications if you want to get notified when the next videos relating to this series will be out. So, thank you for checking out this video, and of course, as usual, until next time, happy clacking.